Wara sena mill-qtil tal-ġurnalista Daphne Caruana Galizia, National Book Council qed itella dan id-dibattitu fuq dik li kienet probabbli l-iktar ġurnalista u kittieba influenti f'pajjiżna. Wara li nqatlet fis-16 ta' Ottubru fl-2017, ix-xogħol ġurnalistiku tagħha mhux biss ħalla legat hawn Malta iżda anke b'mod internazzjonali. Diversi kontroversi għadhom iduru kemm fuq ix-xogħol tagħha kif ukoll bil-mod li kien qatlet. Tul ħajjitha kitbet għall-gazzetti kemm mat-Times of Malta u wkoll għall-Malta Independent. Iżda l-aktar li kienet magħrufa huwa ħabba l-blog tagħha li fih kixfet l-aħbar tal-iskandlu tal-Panama Papers f'Malta. Matul dan id-dibattitu ħan iddiskutu xogħla, il-legat tagħha u l-qtil li għadu qed jiġi investigat bħalissa. Biex nagħmlu dan magħna fil-panel hawn James Debono, ġurnalist mal-MaltaToday u għandu perspettiva kritika dwar il-legat li ħallit wara l-ġurnalista Daphne u il-Herman Grech li huwa l-editur tat-Times of Malta li il-gazzetta tagħmel parti mid-Daphne Project. Biex nibdew, Herman, x'inhu l-legat li ħalla x-xogħol ta' Daphne fil-ġurnaliżmu Malti u internazzjonali?
Naħseb fuq Daphne skont il-min tistaqsi, bażikament. Would you prefer if I speak in English or Maltese? English. Okay. So, the legacy of Daphne Caruana Galizia, basically it depends who you ask. I think if you ask half the country, they'll tell you she was probably the best journalist, investigative journalist Malta's ever had. If you speak to the other half, they'll probably tell you she was just renowned for her poisoned pen, and she won't be thoroughly missed, despite what happened a year ago. So it's when you ask about an open-ended question like, you know, who is Daphne Caruana Galizia according to you? I think it's very difficult. I think the problem with what's happening post the tragedy last year is that we seem to have lost any semblance of objectivity. We have forgotten, I think, what the stories, some of the very good stories that Daphne broke. But of course, on the other side, we also need to understand that certain criticism towards her writing needs to also be discussed, at the very least. The problem is there are no shades of grey in Malta, as we know. Everything's in black and white. And there is always a problem with trying to take a step back and discuss a difficult subject like Daphne Caruana Galizia. In my opinion, Daphne, especially towards the end of her career, she literally broke some of the biggest stories we've had in the recent years, especially where it comes to the Panama Papers. And I think if you only just look at what happened yesterday with the story that the Daphne Project broke about 17 Black, that's when you realize that Daphne at least had sown the seeds to some really important stories which are still untold. On the other side, I can really understand why people feel that they cannot give credit to Daphne Caruana Galizia because of her political leanings, because of maybe the way she addressed certain issues. But I think the most bizarre thing we're witnessing at the moment, the most bizarre thing we're witnessing at the moment is the fact that we can't even in this country even acknowledge that somebody has been blown up in the most brutal way, and people are not even being allowed to pay their tributes. And I think that is disgraceful.
U għalik, James, x'taħseb li hu l-legat li ħallit warajja kemm fil-ġurnaliżmu Malti u dak internazzjonali?
For me, even reading through her blogs, speaking on a personal level, it was a roller coaster experience. Basically, she could take you to heights of analysis and some good investigative stories, and then go down to very personal stuff, gossip, etc. That's, as Herman said, we have to see reality with all its shades of gray. It's not black or white. Unfortunately, after her death, the whole picture was polarized between white and black. And there are, I think, for example, today is a very important occasion because I think it's the first time an official commemoration is taking place. And I congratulate the National Book Council for taking this initiative, because some signals have to be sent to society. I think one of the most ridiculous things over the past weeks and months was this tussle in front of the monument with flowers being taken away, barricades being set. I think that was a very wrong message to Maltese society. It legitimized I think, the sensation that some people cannot make a distinction. Because I think the fundamental problem with this is the whole argument after Daphne Caruana Galizia was murdered was not exactly how divisive she was, how sometimes she could stoop, in my opinion, sometimes she did stoop low. But that's, in a way, somewhat irrelevant, in a way, because we're dealing with a journalist being killed in a country, in a democratic country. This doesn't mean blaming anyone for the death or attributing responsibilities. It just means that as a society, we need to make a distinction between we can disagree or agree with something she wrote, with others disagree with others, agree. But at the same time, we cannot not do this distinction. We can separate what we think about her from the fact that as a society, we are appalled by a horrible murder of an assassination of a journalist. So I think that's something which was my greatest disappointment. On the other side, I think there was a bit of a hagiography about Daphne, which I think it's, in a way, it even disrespects. I didn't know her so much personally, but I think it even disrespects her outlook to life. I think my impression of her, she never had the pretensions of being a hero or a savior or whatever. I think she was a political actor, very much, I think. She was divisive in her ways, and unashamedly so. And I think we should recognize that reality too, out of respect even for her legacy.
Bħala fuq livell professjonali, kif tiftakruha lil Daphne Caruana Galizia?
I think there were moments where she broke new ground, both positively and negatively. She broke very important stories, especially since 2013. But before 2013, personally, speaking from my personal experience, I don't attribute it not just to partisan politics, but I think there was before 2013, she was in a way perceived to be part of the establishment. After 2013, she became the prominent anti-establishment figure. She not only, the greatest change in Daphne was that she started questioning the business, the relationship between big business and politics. And that was new, in a way, new ground too. And I think also the international focus after her death is also linked to the fact that she touched an area which is very important in modern journalism, which is the nexus between crime, politics, and the financial world. Obviously, one can say that she didn't do that before 2013, but after 2013, one has to recognize that her work in this sense was very groundbreaking.
Daphne's political allegiances were very clear. I think it's you can't deny this. So it was, it was quite interesting what happened towards the end of her life when she turned against the leader of the party she's always supported. But of course, some people, you can't really, it's very difficult to say how would you describe Daphne, because there were times when I said, I wish I got that story. I wish that the source contacted me. And there were times when I was, like many other people, almost disgusted with some of the things she wrote, because I don't believe you should be attacking people personally. But there is an arena for that. It is blogging, and it is a new way of actually contesting certain things. It's a way of getting to certain people. And what she's doing is obviously, in a conservative country like Malta, she was obviously breaking new ground, and you can't dispute that.
One cannot overlook the gossip side. I think that was, she broke new ground on that, but I think, in a way, there was a contradiction in her. She was a foremost liberal thinker on many issues, and at the same time, unfortunately, she pandered to the honor and shame code of the upper middle class in Malta, in a sense that she shamed people, and shaming them for sexual misadventures, having affairs, which one can say that in some cases these can have a public interest, but at other times it was just, in a way, motivated by bile, in a way, in that sense. But at the same time, these two realities coexisted in Daphne. She wrote also very important stories. Sometimes she provided insights and very brilliant analysis, and one cannot forget her command of the English language, which I think, in a way, two things I think, in fact, we should not ignore. Her command of the language made the people she criticized feeling more powerless, in a way, because very few people could fight back with using the same eloquence and language. And the fact that she was a woman, I think that's a very important thing. I think, because obviously I referred to that sometimes she was very acrimonious, but at the same time, the feeling against her was very raw and very crude. And I think the fact that she was a woman made a difference. She was called witch, she was called lots of things. And I think the idea of, in Maltese society, I think having a very affirmative, a very strong woman, it's unsettling for some people, I think.
U kif tiddeskrivu l-istil tal-kitba tagħha li taħsbu li kien l-aħjar xogħol ġurnalistiku tagħha f'Malta?
I think it's very obvious that Daphne's best work was with the Panama Papers. She obviously had good contacts. I mean, she was the one who really sparked off stories such as 17 Black. Obviously, at the time, she didn't live long enough to maybe explore the stories further, and this is why Times of Malta is now part of this international collaboration called the Daphne Project, to try to at least continue some of the stories she had started. Now, there were important stories. There was the gossip element, as James is saying. You know, what's important to me might not be important to you people over here, because you know, obviously we have different ideas about what really makes news. And there were times when even us as journalists in a newsroom would discuss, is this a story or is this just pure gossip? Now, you know, we only had this last week. I mean, this is the nature of journalism, and it's almost the beauty of journalism that you do not agree on sometimes what is of news value. There was this discussion about the opposition leaders' marital issues last week. You know, was that in the public interest or wasn't it? So, you know, we are. I think personally, obviously, when the Panama Papers stories broke up, I mean, let's face it, with what she wrote, with what she reported, with the e-grant issue, which, let's face it, precipitated a general election according to what the Prime Minister himself says. So they were obviously important stories, and there was this one-woman machine, basically. But this one-woman machine, in a way, worked against her.
She had an advantage over us who work in newsrooms. She was on her own. It was an advantage and a disadvantage. Obviously, being on your own could make you more vulnerable, and I see the human aspect of this woman who took up all against so many enemies. But at the same time, journalists in a newsroom are bound by a certain discipline. You cannot write whatever crops up into your head.
And that is the problem we had.
She had this power to
yeah, I mean,
act with her.
I've had these issues. I mean, I've had these discussions with friends of mine who would tell me, why didn't you follow that story? And I would say, we did follow the story, but we can't confirm it.
But you can't use that language and that...
No, but sometimes you can't even confirm it from your own source. And Daphne, would you just go ahead and publish? Now, is that right?
Exactly.
I think probably most of you would say yes, some of you would say no.
I cannot personally write a story without having corroborations,
yes,
some form of source, and more, while she could just write. So at the same time, one of the most interesting things about the Daphne phenomena was that she created an online community. I think it's the first, it was a historical thing because it was one woman with this big online community which followed her, fed her stories. Of course, even newspapers get fed stories, but she had this, around her website, there was a kind of movement, which in a way it's healthy for a democracy because it was, the online sphere, she contributed to give it life. At the same time, it created also this, a blind loyalty towards her, which a bit cult-like.
Yes, I mean, she did create.
We believe it because it's on her website.
She did create a kind of cult following, which still exists today, and probably today it's even stronger than ever. And I think this is what happened when Daphne was eliminated. The people who eliminated basically, planted the seeds to hundreds of other people who would follow in her footsteps. Now, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it's clearly, you simply cannot just eliminate somebody, and especially the way Daphne was killed. I mean, because you are really creating a cult figure, and her legacy will live on forever.
And for example, you mentioned 17 Black. The way she put the story was photo. I remember
there was a bit of brick teasing, basically. I mean, with it bluntly.
Which was, in a way, because I think even as it was followed by the Daphne project, in my opinion, it's the most valuable, the greatest contribution so far of the Daphne project, how they followed from this picture on her website, it became one of the most important stories in the country. But it all started with just a picture of Conrad Mitzi, Keith Cambry, and John Daly, I think, who so far hasn't cropped up in it. And I think I forgot what. And just there was a roulette image or something like that.
U għalik, James, lim taħseb li kien l-aħjar xogħol ġurnalistiku tagħha f'Malta?
I think one cannot. Obviously, the way she broke the Panama thing was, and it also it was ground. It broke ground and it shocked the whole country. But even she all along there were very interesting insights, which it goes beyond one story. It was a style. She was sui generis in the media landscape in that sense.
Kif u għaliex taħseb li l-legat ta' Daphne f'Malta du diviżiv u kontroversjali? Taħseb li Daphne iktar qed tiġi ċelebrata barra minn Malta, iktar milli f'pajjiżna, u jekk danu minnu għaliex?
Well, as I said before, I think one of the reasons is that definitely there was a context. First of all, it's a journalist being killed in a EU member state. Unfortunately, she was the first in a series of journalists who were killed. So obviously, that on its own invites scrutiny. I am annoyed by this sense of siege, the idea that there are traitors or conspiracies against Malta. That's, for me, it's bullshit. Because it's obvious when a journalist in an EU country is murdered, there is scrutiny on it. And secondly, obviously, the context was that she, although she wrote stuff which I completely disagreed with, she also wrote, especially in her last two years, about the nexus between crime, politics, and international finance. And that also made her more relevant because one of the new frontiers of journalism is whether Daphne did it for partisan reasons or not. That's another issue. But she touched that area. And that area is, I think it's one of the new frontiers of global journalism. Most journalists are interested in this nexus between crime and international crime and international politics. So that was to be expected. At the same time, obviously, in Malta, her divisive personality meant that, unfortunately, there was a part of Malta which glorified her and, in my opinion, maybe created a hagiography which does not always reflect the reality of Daphne. And at the same time, there was visceral hatred towards her, which, okay, one can explain in a way because she hurt people. And she did. I have friends of my own which were hurt by, and were mentioned in the most irrelevant things, like being children and being locked in a wardrobe, or it's very, people obviously feel that thing, but at the same time, there is, one can make a distinction. One can disagree with what some of the things she wrote, but at the same time, it's a very serious thing that a journalist was murdered in a democratic country.
What happens is, I've seen several times when the foreign media have reported about Daphne, and there were times when I disagreed with the reports being published. I mean, some of the descriptions leveled out at Daphne, probably she would have disapproved of them herself. So there is this thing of the idolization, because ultimately, let's face it, it's not every day that a journalist in Europe is killed.
In a way, it's inevitable, it's the Che Guevara.
Yes, exactly. So the same way it's happened now with Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist, that there's this idolization towards somebody who was killed. But this siege mentality that James made reference to is unbelievable. You know, when we talk and when we just refer to Daphne and we continue following up with legitimate questions like every media organization should be following, and we are accused of bias, of it's about time you stop talking about this issue as though we need to pretend it's business as usual. I'm sorry, it's not going to be like that. The minute we decide that it's business as usual and just pretend we forget about the murder simply because we didn't like Daphne, it doesn't work that way. Yet, we have a lot of people who think along those lines. Last night there was Naomi Klein sitting on the same platform, and she spoke about Daphne, and she spoke about it this morning as well. And the amount of rubbish, hatred posted on our website today is unbelievable. I was moderating some of those comments this morning, and most of the comments were along the lines of, piss off back to your country, whoever you are, Miss Nobody author. You don't have any right to interfere in our affairs. I find that infantile at best, cruel at worst.
And it's a contradiction of, politically we're supposed to be committed to cosmopolitanism. It's become the new buzzword, become a cosmopolitan Malta. And part of cosmopolitanism, being cosmopolitan, is being exposed to international scrutiny.
But it's the small island
side of the coin.
It's the small island mentality.
Obviously, as Herman said, some of the observation, when foreign journalists look at Malta, their judgment isn't infallible. Sometimes they, for example, the president in Malta, in another country, the presence of a minister in a bar has a different significance than the presence of a minister in a bar in Malta. It's a small country politics, patronage relationships. It's a different. Foreign journalists do not always understand the context. Some of them do talk to other Maltese journalists and try to understand the context, but sometimes, it happens. Usually, no reason for this state of siege or.
Kif semmejt inti Herman il-bieraħ Naomi Klein irreferiet għal Daphne u semmit ukoll kif il-Ministru tal-Ġustizzja qed iwaqqa' żufjet fuq Instagram dan il-każ. Taħseb li hu fl-interess tal-Gvern li fl-aħħar mill-aħħar toħroġ il-verità dwar il-qtil tal.
Bla dubju naħseb jiena sakemm ħajsibu min kien il-moħħ wara d-delitt. Din l-istorja mhux se tmut u nista' niggarantilkom li naħseb l-ebda medja qas internazzjonali mista torqod fuq din l-istorja. Ġifieri huwa fl-interess tal-Gvern li jiġi riżolt dal-każ. Il-problema hija l-Gvern qed jagħmel għalija issa hemm ammissjoni uffiċjali qed jagħmel ħmerijiet li qed inaddaf dak il-monument saret mhux ċajta, nara, it's turned sad, the whole, sorry, I'm going to switch to English. It's turned sad that we are, we see the cleansing department cleaning up a tribute to a journalist. I mean, I was in Paris a few weeks ago, and the Place de la République, it's still shrines to the Charlie Hebdo case. So why the government officially now, because it has admitted, is going there cleaning up with a broom what is a legitimate memorial is beyond me. I mean, it's attracting attention it shouldn't be doing. And no wonder Naomi Klein said this morning, I have never seen anything like this anywhere in the world. It's attracting attention to itself. Why? Instead of going out there and saying, I'm determined to resolve this case, and, acting really fast, and yes, accepting calls for a public inquiry, it's getting involved in these petty things, and Naomi Klein was right to say that it was very, I think it was unacceptable for our Justice Minister to actually tweet a picture of himself with a beard and comparing to the image which is now portrayed next to Daphne's shrine. I don't think it's apt for a minister especially a justice minister, to be behaving in that way. But we need to be very careful, because then there are two sides to the equation. I keep hearing people, almost decided who was behind Daphne's murder, as though we have the proof. And I think we need to be very, very careful. All right, this is where I think the media has now to be very super careful about the proof. Whether we can't just equate any government person, official, minister to the murder when we have no proof. And that is the mistake, I think, which is being made by certain individuals. You need to be very careful. This is a super delicate case. And I think before we have further proof, I think it might actually backfire to start pointing fingers at different people, because we risk alienating people who might potentially be allies.
Fuq il-monument, għalli għaj burċinellata, speċi, ma nistax niddiskrivi għamot ieħor li toqt tamel il-barikati, speċi, there is a natural healing process which happens in every country where such a brutal assassination happens. Għalli għaj burċinellata di. Naqbel ma ħafna ma Herman, pero li instant blame fuq ekkam lezzjoni ta' daw l-aħħar sentejja illi nitkellmu fuq l-affarijiet li huma li hemm evidenza dokumentata u ħafna wild speculations ma jwasslhom kien they backfire ma dak argument ieħor ma naħseb ħafna drabi in-nies implikati f'korruzzjoni, jekk toqgħod tolli kull darba l-stakes u ittihom fejn jaħarbu. Jien dik l-impressjoni tiegħi. Jiġifieri hekk minn Panama li kienet għalija ħaġa serjissima li jkollok Ministru Chief of Staff b'kumpanija fil-Panama hija ħaġa ovvja li tirreżenja awtomatikament. Mbagħad spiċċajna dejjem nollu dawn ma rriżenjawx imma mbagħad ġiet l-elezzjoni ħarġet E-Grant backfired completely fl-opinjoni tiegħi, imma insomma. Jiġifieri l-elezzjoni ta' l-aħħar sentejja hemm affarijiet fejn evidenza fejn int ċert u fuq hekk mhux biss il-ġurnaliżmu anke l-politika fl-opinjoni tiegħi, jiġifieri di li nollu l-stakes il-ħin kollu tagħmel ħsara d-demokrazija naħseb. Per eżempju, l-istorja li ħarġet il-bieraħ li tidher dokumentata u fiha ħafna xtomot. Jiġifieri hemmhekk fejn issa nagħmlu argumenti razzjonali.
U wara dan kollu taħsbu li hemm interessi politiċi propagati anke għall-għajta tal-ġustizzja u mbagħad min-naħa l-oħra?
Ovvjament, aħna ngħixu f'soċjetà partiġjana u issa iktar minn hekk morna f'qasmiet oħra ġifieri. Hemm divides oħra anke fil-Partit Nazzjonalista li ovvjament jagħtu ċertu kuntest. Jiġifieri il-politika partiġjana u Malta sfortunatament it penetrates every aspect of civil society life.
I mean, the murder of Daphne basically completely divided the country beyond belief. I mean, when you kill a person who stood for something, I mean, she was obviously...
Forse għanek biex naqbel, jien naħseb ukoll kien hemm element qawwi ta' indifferenza wkoll.
No, the indifference, but I think the indifference stems from the hatred towards Daphne. And we need to be honest. So many people hated her that for them it was business as usual. And this is the problem, irrespective of your belief. But your belief towards a person, you can't simply eliminate a critic in that way. And it would be a mistake, if any of the media, whatever they thought of Daphne, to just, abandon the story. And this is, there's a feeling of lethargy already setting in.
It should work both ways, because I think there was also, from the followers of Daphne, there is a certain reluctance to accept a critical debate about the figure of Daphne.
I totally
which
agree. I totally agree with you. Yes, but what
is
I'm saying
counterproductive,
is
you know.
that us as journalists, society in general, just can't accept that this case will remain unresolved. I mean, fine. Big crimes in Italy, 80% of the mafia cases are never resolved. But let's face it, I mean, Daphne was not just killed, all right? She was eliminated in a spectacle of gore. And
this is my personal opinion. I think the fact that there is so much partisan divide, the multi-institutions in Malta are so affected by this partisan divide too, that I think it justifies some kind of independent inquiry on her death. And that, from that perspective, I think, personally, I agree with a personal inquiry.
the problem is, we're so split right down the middle. I mean, there are, including some friends of mine who are here today, and sometimes when we get talking about it, we're not seeing eye to eye over the role of the media, over the fact that if I don't have certain proof, I cannot proceed with the story. Trust me, the story of 17 Black yesterday, we spent weeks working on that. I don't know how many versions of the story I saw before we decided to publish. And we needed to get it sound checked legally, and we spoke to different people. It is not easy. But this is the problem then where it comes to the activist side sometimes, when we are being accused of not doing our job, that it was only Daphne doing proper journalism. I'm sorry, that is a bit of an insult, because there are still some decent people doing a decent job. I think if we look at some of the stories that came out with the Daphne project, those were some of our journalists working on those stories, and it wasn't easy, okay? Now, of course, everything has changed in Malta. The way we do journalism has changed. On one side, you're kind of being portrayed as kind of doing something heroic. Some people think we are the only opposition in Malta nowadays, But again, let's also get a reality check, Sometimes people are saying, oh, you must feel under threat all the time and you must be scared. No, I think what has changed in Malta is not the feeling of fear. I still feel pretty easy doing my job. I think the threats that are coming, especially from the state, are different nowadays. Okay, the threats are coming through financial means. Okay, when the authorities stop advertising with you, it's about crippling your way. It's about being ignored in this day and age. And this is what people really need to start thinking about. I'm talking about society in general. This Trump politics is catching on in Europe, and it is catching on in Malta. It's very easy to say, being branded fake news, or that, as we heard this afternoon, that the latest story is a concoction of conspiracy theories. It's very easy for a politician to make that kind of statement. It's very easy for the people to believe it. This is where the media needs some support. We make mistakes. We screw up. Like most other news organizations do. But trust me, there are far more checks and balances than most people think.
Grazzi James u grazzi Herman, jekk forsi tixtieq l-udjenza taddilna 3 mistoqsijiet inkunu jistgħu iwiġbuhom flimkien. Xi ħadd jixtieq jistaqsi?
Thank you both. I particularly enjoyed listening to you, James. I'm not a big fan of Malta Today. That's an understatement. But I think you spoke very sensibly. There are many things that I'd like to say, but I won't. I think critical at this point in time for me is, what do you see as your role, Times of Malta, MaltaToday, and any other newspaper, any other journalist, what's your role to break down this tribalism? 1 year on, I have heard, even today, too little about the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. I don't care if she was divisive. She put up a private blog, her own money. I can put up a blog, nobody knows who I am. You can read it, or you can just never read it, never even know it exists. So people who went to follow did that willingly and consciously. She was not doing a public service. People went and read it and dissed it if they wanted to. So, in order to move forward, I think it's also very much your role to take away or to help build down this tribalism, this partisanship, this also using this woman who was murdered, underscore woman. We live in a macho society. Ask any woman, okay? We are easy targets, and we are strong women too, but still. So my question is, how do the different newspapers plan to build away or to eat away at the partisan divide? Or are you also somehow supporting it? Because as you said, Herman, you need the adverts, you need the advertising money.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay.
Any other questions, please?
You talked about Daphne as being the queen of bile and something of a freak almost. But I was brought up and spent most of my life in the UK. And out there, we're all very used to Private Eye, and I see Daphne as just a Maltese version of Private Eye, a mix of investigative journalism and gossip. What do you feel?
There's another question, if I'm...
Mine isn't really so much as a question, it's just kind of series of comments on what people have kind of said, as opposed to a question, if that's okay. I mean, one of the things that was mentioned was about a cult right at the beginning. I think that was James, who talked about a cult both during her life and after it. I think that perpetuates this. I mean, I for one, didn't follow her blog, you know, but when she was assassinated, I was shocked, horrified, you know, because that to me is a natural reaction to anybody being assassinated and a journalist being assassinated and in a small country. So the cult thing, I think, just perpetuates the whole ideological nonsense about whether she was a saint or a witch, but the saint comes from the same place as a witch. When she was alive, she was a witch. When she died, the same people who called her a witch then accused other people of calling her a saint. So that's the same rubbish. I agree with the other person. She was part of a tradition of satire. You know, she didn't just find 17 black. She exposed Conrad Mitzi a long time ago, Keisha Kembry, fuel smuggling from Libya, mafia infiltration of the gaming industry, blah, blah, blah. She was a pretty incredible journalist. She could also go into other styles. So what? You know, she's free to do that. Private Eye did the same. That's not a criticism. It's probably actually to her credit that she was able to do that. There was mention being made about she didn't source her work. Well, I'm not sure how true that is either. But again, if she's writing on a blog, she doesn't have the same restrictions. She has a different vulnerability. She's more exposed. She doesn't have the same restrictions if she's writing for a, you know, a big newspaper. What were the other things? There were various things that kind of came to my mind. Hang on, let me check my notes. 2 minutes. There was also discussion of democracy. And it would be nice to think that we're talking here tonight and we're living in a democracy, but I think it's pretty clear that we're not. One of the things that was mentioned was, you know, you can't point fingers, you can't say who killed her. No, nobody's suggesting that you can. The police do that, but the police are not doing that. In a normal country, 17 Black is exposed. Conrad admits he should already have been under criminal investigation, as should Keisha Kembry, criminal investigation, not inquiries, magisterial inquiries, you know, initiated by the Prime Minister about E-Grant. No, these are police investigations. This doesn't happen in Malta. You know, I've realised a long time ago, if I find something's going wrong in this country, who do I call? No one.
Thank you.
There was someone.
What can we do about tribalism? I really wish I had an answer. I've almost started giving up because, you know, just look at what's going on your Facebook wall. Just look at the comments boards. We moderate. Times of Malta actually moderates those comments, guys, and you see how divisive they are. If you look at the other news organizations, they don't moderate them, and that's where you see the bile and the hatred and the tribalism, and you know, everything's blue or red. And I really don't know. This morning, I uploaded a blog by this Englishman who lives in Gozo, saying, I came to Malta, fell in love with it, but I'm giving up because of this tribalism. That everything is a battle. We fight. We don't know how to argue. There's no critical thinking. And I get very angry with this. But what my problem is, I think there's also a problem sometimes about each one of us accepting criticism. And I've seen it from even some of the activists, that the minute I question certain tactics, certain maybe ideas. I've been branded that I'm sticking up for the Labour government. I've been branded that I'm trying to cover up for Conrad Mitzi. And I don't think it's very, as much as I can take it, I don't think it's very useful. Because if we want to really avoid tribalism, sometimes we need to look at ourselves. And I see this all over the place. I see it in my own newsroom sometimes. You know, some of the discourse doesn't lend itself to some sort of critical thinking.
And newsrooms tend to be a pluralistic place where some people just pigeonhole even newspapers, which are composed of people with different ideas, who disagree, who have arguments, who usually... Herman mentioned one important point about newspapers, the threats of adverts. I think it's about time to address this problem through, as happens in other European countries, through state financing of newspapers. To have instead of relying on it's a bit of a ridiculous system of relying on adverts by government bodies. Instead, you get there should be a fund which should go to promote a healthy.
Let's remember.
Because the thing about MaltaToday, for example, used to experience it even under previous governments. It's something which should be addressed. It's ridiculous to have governments using leverage of adverts.
Yeah, but they still do. It's happened in the past, it's happening now. So let's remember, 80% of all advertising nowadays goes to Google and Facebook.
We can agree with a concrete proposal here that there should be a fund which basically promotes a healthy, democratic...
But going back to your question about Daphne, about satire, I think that's a very relevant point. The Maltese don't do satire. No. We don't understand it. We get insulted. And Daphne did it very, very well.
When I refer to bile, not queen, I don't use like the expression queen of bile. But I wasn't referring to... I tended to like the way, in fact, she took some big egos to task. I have no problem with ridicule. What personally I found disturbing in her writing was deploying a sort of honor and shame of shaming people. That's I did, and using sometimes very moralistic. She was a liberal who sometimes used very moralistic language against people who deviated from normal family life, who had extramarital affairs, and some of them were really irrelevant. To that aspect I referred, not to Daphne's taking people to task or even ridicule. It's part of a healthy media landscape in a way.
I think it's very difficult to analyze, probably from what you can see. I mean, James and myself think pretty much on the same wavelength where it comes to Daphne. But in reality, there are times when even I question myself, over certain stories she wrote. What were her interests? There was definitely a political, partisan interest. Sometimes, there was a time when she decided, the Times was helping Joseph Muscat to come to power, and whatever we did, she just hated us. She had every right. She was a blogger. She had every right to do that. But again, going beyond all this, I think we're 1 year on from her murder. And I feel there's a sense of lethargy creeping in already about people saying, oh, are you going to write again about her murder and repeating the same things? And, oh, do you have to report again the fact that the monument's being cleared up? Yes, we have to, because it's unacceptable in a democratic country that these things happen. Now, even if the number of people actually saying, agreeing with me is going down, and I'm quite sure there are more people saying, they couldn't care less. Frankly, I'm not really surprised with the turnout of the event. And again, kudos to the Book Council to actually take this on a national level, because it is a subject, it's the elephant in the room. You can't discuss Daphne on a national level in this country. And, so it is actually a good thing. But yet, there is this feeling that, hey, she was a hate blogger anyway. Why should we bother so much? We will bother so much because this was a murder. It happened in broad daylight.
Nispera li sibtu din id-diskussjoni interessanti. Grazzi Herman u grazzi James.